So we're here for, I think it's the final of the breakout session, so after this it's just back for one more keynote and AuSakai 2010. We're done, that's great. So Steve Swinsburn from the Australian National University is going to present Connecting Sakai and uPortal. Steve is Senior Software Engineer for the Australian National University and holds a Master's degree in Information Technology and a Bachelor of Science degree, both from University of New England, Australia. He also has several years of tertiary teaching experience. Steve is a Sakai Foundation Fellow, 2009-2010, and is part of the Sakai 2 maintenance team, the kernel team, the security working group, and manages 2.5 and 2.6 maintenance directors. Have you got any time for anything else? No. Steve's also written over a dozen articles on Sakai best practice and how-tos, and regularly blogs about Sakai related developments. In 2008, he had a paper published on Sakai in distance education, published in the Australian AuSakai journal, which is, and I did look this up, the Australian Society for Computers in Learning in Tertiary Education.
That's right.
So welcome and enjoy.
Thanks a lot. Oh. So thanks everyone for coming along to the final session. Hopefully you'll get something out of this one. It's quite an interesting one. Today we're talking about a different type of portal. So Sakai itself is a portal, but what we wanted to do was connect it into another portal product. And so we're going to talk about why we wanted to do that, how we actually did it, and give you a bit of a demo on what we came up with. So we're bringing a portal online at ANU. Essentially, it'll be a one-stop shop for all student and staff services. So you don't need to go to multiple websites to get your pay slips and change your name and all this. We wanted to aggregate all this together. And something of note was that IMS Basic LTI, which is from the IMS group, and Basic LTI is Learning Tools Interoperability. It's been recently added to Sakai. So using that, we thought that we might be able to actually get some sort of integration going. So a very quick look before we actually go into it. This is actually inside uPortal, and it's a portlet that sits there and it renders Sakai tools inside there. So users, when they configure the portlet themselves, they can add it to their page, drag and drop it around, kind of like in iGoogle. It's got that sort of drag and drop layout. You can add in any tool you want. So in this particular image, we've got in the resources tool from my workspace, if you have a look there. And yeah, so we could add any tool we want really into uPortal, and they're coming from Sakai. So how we did it was basically using Basic LTI plus also a few extra web services to give us a bit of data. Just wait till a few more people come in. So just for the new people, essentially what we're doing at ANU is we're bringing a portal online, and we wanted to aggregate a bunch of services together so people didn't have to log into multiple websites to do things. One of the sites being Alliance, our version of Sakai. We wanted to be able to embed tools from Sakai. Look at a full section. I'll have to take a photo of this one. What do you want to leave? So yeah, we didn't want people going to multiple websites to do things. We wanted to aggregate things together. One of those being Sakai. So using the new capabilities in Sakai called IMS Basic LTI and a couple of extra web services which we wrote, we're able to actually get this integration going. So Basic LTI, as I mentioned, learning tools interoperability. It doesn't actually have to be used for learning tools, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. But essentially allows the rendering of external tools in Sakai, so we can pull tools into Sakai, but also we can expose those tools outside, so we don't need to be logged into Sakai to actually use them. It all comes down to a specially crafted HTTP request, which is sent from, in this case, the portlet to Sakai, and then Sakai says, yep, that's cool, I'll take it to the tool. And that is actually signed by a thing called OAuth, which adds in a few extra parameters so that on the receiving end, it can check that the request hasn't been tampered with. So if you've done any external integrations in the past, this is pretty much how it's done, but Basic LTI sort of ratifies that into a standard so that you can write a provider and anyone can connect in. You don't have to have a special, specially named parameters. So, like I said, it's been done a lot in the past. Essentially, the parameters, a shared secret and a checksum. The initial Basic LTI implementation in Sakai, it actually namespaced users and sites to keep them away from the general population. So, if you have a look in the middle there, we've got a user that's come in. We've got our internal users, so Erin, Steve, the admin user, plus also this other user, which I would hate to have to log in with that. And the other issue is that when the user actually comes in, so in the initial implementation, when the user comes in, they don't get a password sent to them. So whilst they continue to access the same sort of data, they can't use any data that they had before. So if they want to expose, say, the wiki from a site that they've been working on for 5 years, in the initial implementation, they weren't able to do that. So, like I said, the new users and the sites being created, not ideal for integrating for systems. So what we did was we modified Basic LTI in Sakai to allow the clean pass-through of data. So you give it a username, and that's the username that goes through. You give it a site, that's the site that it will use. So it skips all that name spacing. And to activate this is in the version of Sakai that ships in 2.7, is one additional Sakai property. And we'll get to the configuration a little later on. So in order to get the actual data we needed in the portlet, we have to add a few extra web services. One of the parameters that you need to send is the user ID, and in the IMS spec, the Basic LTI spec, it says that that shouldn't be sort of like used to identify someone, even though it's a user ID. So luckily in Sakai we have the internal user ID, the big long string. So we wrote a web service to return that given your username. So username of Steve might return back the long identifier. We also needed to add in another web service which returned all the pages and tools that were in a site. So this is returned as an XML document, and then we can parse that and turn it into like a drop-down list. So given a site ID. And then we used a couple of these existing web services that are already in there, getting a session for a user and getting all the sites that a user actually has access to. So the get pages and tools for site returns a piece of XML like this. So we can see we've got all the pages, and we've then got all the tools and the name of the tools and the ID. So when we go to make that request, we've actually got the ID that we need to send along for the particular tool and also the particular site that we want to use. So then on the portlet, using that information, we've added a few configuration parameters, so you can set the title of the portlet, the height, how big you want it, just like you can on a normal Sakai page. And then using the web services, we return the list of sites that a user has access to, so in a drop-down list. And then once they've chosen their site, fires off another request to get all the tools and pages, formats that into a drop-down list, which you can then select the tools. In the configuration on Sakai, you can say, only the resources in the wiki tool are allowed to be used. And then so on the uPortal side, obviously it'll only expose those two tools. A bit of a techie part now, and what an actual Basic LTI request looks like is essentially just a post request with a bunch of parameters in it, just like a normal HTTP request. The top one at the one at the top is the URL that the request is made to. So in this case, the Basic LTI provider in Sakai and the tool that we want to use, and then the rest of the stuff is essentially who that user is, where the site, which site we should render the tool from, and then the hash and the nonce and things like that to secure that request. I've left out a few parameters just because they didn't fit on, but the main part of that is that you're sending along the user ID, the site ID, the tool ID. And so what it looks like is this. This is the portlet sitting inside uPortal, rendering the the resources tool from Sakai. This is actually our one from our My Workspace. It could be any site that we had access to, and it could have all of our resources that we've had for years. So we've skipped that namespacing, we're using the data straight up. So we've got a little screencast demo, which I'll just talk through as it plays. So we're in Sakai, and we're logging in as the user, Steve. And so we're in My Workspace, and we're going to go to the Resources tool, and we see there we've got 2 files. So now we're going to flip over to uPortal, log in with the same user. That's the important part, that the user needs to be the same in both systems. Okay, we don't have any portlets added to our page, so we're going to add one. Okay, so I've already installed the Sakai portlet into uPortal, so I can just add that to my page. And straight away it's saying, I'm not configured yet. So we just click the to enter the edit mode for that portlet. Type in the title that we want. So this is where you can have multiple tools. So you could call this resources from My Workspace, and then you could say profile from My Workspace, or just profile. So it renders in an iframe, so that's why we need to set the portlet height. And there you can see, I'll just pause it for a moment if I can, without skipping. Ooh, stuffed it up now. That's where it fired off that web service request to get the list of users, list of sites. I have to sit through this again, sorry. One step that I haven't actually illustrated here is that it's not showing the resources tool because I'm also logged into Sakai. I could have just logged out, and then it's going to re-log me back in when I make the request. So again, adding the portlet to our page. Okay, so configuration. Again, setting the title and the height. Like I said, the web service request to get the list of sites. So that comes back as XML, which we then parse. So I'm in 3 sites, and I'm going to choose My Workspace. So now it's fired off the request and parsed that list of the tools that we're allowed. So in this particular case, even though in the My Workspace we have a whole stack of tools, the account, membership, schedule, we've only allowed the profile and the resources tool to come through. And we've chosen resources tool, and here it is, so we can use it just as if we would be using it in Sakai itself. So we're going to upload a file. Okay, that's done. Upload another one, all within the context of uPortal itself. And I think now we're going to flip over to Sakai, just to prove that those files are actually there. Here we are. So we've integrated the resources tool into something completely different. This is just showing that it's actually running on my laptop itself, but running on different ports. So it might as well just be a completely different system on the other side of the world. Okey-dokey. So because it's a connection that's essentially trusted between 2 systems, the configuration is a little involved, but it's all documented. On the Sakai side, we need to set a few Sakai properties. So we obviously need the web services enabled. This particular configuration is insecure because it'll allow anyone to be able to connect. What you would put there is like a list of IP addresses and host names that are allowed to connect. That's documented on Confluence in Sakai. So when you enable this, just check that your syntax is correct and make sure you use a few different machines to make sure you can't get in there. Basic LTI actually needs the web services turned on anyway, so that's handy. And then in order to activate Basic LTI itself, we set the property to true. This is where we give it a list of tools that are allowed to be exposed. So obviously you wouldn't put, or maybe you would, put administrative tools in, but generally just the normal user tools. So here we've got resources in the wiki. And the next property is a little bit unique in that the way it works is that a consumer, which will, in this case is the uPortal portlet itself, has like a key. And the whole thing works on shared keys and secrets essentially. So the key is like a public key. So in our case we just called it my.anu.edu.au. And then we've set a secret for that particular consumer key. So in this case it's just secret. I've highlighted everything in red that needs to stay the same between all the configuration, because obviously on the portlet side you need to have the same key, because that'll be sent in the request. And then on the Sakai side, that's when it checks to see that the key you've used to sign the request is legit. And finally, that last property that I mentioned before that allows the clean pass-through of user details and site details without prefixing them is the highly trusted consumers. And so here's where we give it a list of keys. So if we have multiple consumers, all different systems connecting into Sakai, they'll obviously have different keys. But we can say just that one is allowed to send the username and that and site information through without being prefixed, whereas these ones actually have to be namespaced away. So a bit of configuration for the portlet as well. This is built that you could just drop into uPortal. We've also built it so that it works in Liferay as well. However, you obviously need to set the portlet XML and web XML settings before you start up. First one is the endpoint, so that's the URL of your Sakai Basic LTI provider, and essentially if you just fill in the server bit, like sakai.anu or alliance.anu in our case, that would be the URL. The key, which needs to be the same, and the secret, which is the shared secret for that particular key. The list of allowed tools again, because the web service we wrote is quite generic and it will return all of the tools and pages in the site, we then need to filter that list. So even though when the request goes to Sakai, it will say, well, you've requested a tool that's not actually allowed, so you're not allowed to do that. We wanted a better user experience, so we put the same filtering in here so that they can only choose those two tools. And then because we're using the web services, we do actually need an admin user to be sending out those web service requests, because one of them is a restricted web service in that you can get a session for a user just given their ID. So we want to make sure that only a few people are doing that. And finally, the last attribute there is new for the latest release of this portlet, and that allows different mappings of usernames. So in uPortal, the mapping of the username property is username. In Liferay, it's something like user nickname. So we need to set that property so that the proper user ID gets pushed through. So what's next? We've started work on a generic Basic LTI portlet, so not just for Sakai, like connecting Sakai tools in. So that'll expand the capabilities of this portlet greatly. We're thinking that we can connect in, say, a Moodle tool. I heard word of WordPress and MediaWiki being Basic LTI enabled, so then we'll be able to embed in like a MediaWiki on the same page as perhaps a Sakai tool. I plan to do some work on the PeopleSoft side so that we can render the, does anyone use PeopleSoft for their system? Oh yeah, cool. So the PeopleSoft has a portal itself, and in that portal there are portlets, so we can embed the portlets. So like getting your pay slips or updating your emergency contacts, we can embed all of that stuff as a Basic LTI portal. And also we run a DSpace repository, so I'm thinking that we might be able to add a Basic LTI provider to DSpace, and then we'll be able to use this same portlet to connect all of those different systems into the one spot. So the portlet itself being a uPortal portlet initially, is available on the JARSIG website. There's a whole bunch of portlets that are, it's kind of like the contrib space for Sakai. That's where the portlets go. All the information, configuration, installation, documentation, especially about all those properties that you need to set, where you need to set them and what bits need to stay the same between the configuration, that's all available in that Confluence space. Yeah, thanks a lot. Any questions?
Just wondering if there's any overlap between that and the work Lance has been doing in hybrid. Is it completely separate technology, or is there some similarities?
So it's using the same basic LTI provider from Sakai 2. So the way that works is in Sakai 3 they've got a consumer which embeds the Sakai 2 sites and tools and using exactly the same sort of methods. A little bit different because this is inside a portlet, but pretty much the same principle, yeah.
One other one.
Yep.
So you've got, like you bring in the resources tool, could you potentially bring in separate views for different sites?
Yeah, that's right. So each portlet is completely unique.
Yeah.
So you could have the resources tool from, say, my workspace, and the wiki tool from some other site right next to each other. And yeah, if you only use those tools, you know, if they're the most used tools, you don't need to log into a different system, go to different sites to do it. You can just do it all.
Be good if you could web dev between the two.
Oh yeah, that'd be pretty sweet. Drag and drop. Anyone else? Anyone using uPortal? No? Oh, Danny.
Steve,
Yep.
can you have a single sign-on process that will enable you to log in only once and access both systems?
Yeah, so uPortal itself, when you actually you know, download it these days, it comes with a CAS server built in, like single sign-on, or you can just point it at an existing single sign-on system. So when you use the portlet inside the portal, it already knows who you are. So as long as you're logged into the portal, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, like single sign-on or just log in locally, it will use the same credentials. Does that answer your question?
I was actually thinking along the lines of only having to log in once and automatically accessing, say, you know, Sakai plus uPortal, because I noticed you did have to quite literally log in twice.
Oh, that was
Once
only,
each system.
okay, so the first login I did was just to show you that I had some resources sitting in there. I didn't have to actually do that step.
Oh, okay.
So you could just log into the portal itself, and it will take care of, in the basic LTI request, that's what takes care of logging you into Sakai and figuring out what you've got. So you do only have to log in once.
Okay, but at any point in time, will you be required to change your password? I know that over here, every 90 days or so, we have to change our passwords, and that's automatically synchronized.
Right, so this doesn't use passwords at all. This is used as a trusted request. Okay. So if you change your password in Sakai, that doesn't matter, because there's no password involved. So as long as you can log into uPortal or LifeRail or whatever portal you're using, then yeah, it will just work.
If I could ask you one more question,
Yep.
do you always use localhost?
On my laptop I do.
Oh, okay.
That's like for a local development. That just means the local machine.
Right, but in more of a, how should I say, a production environment, you mentioned it is possible to log into a uPortal that's based on a server on the other side of the world.
That's right, yeah. So if your portal, like let's say you had a portal here, like a production portal, you could connect it to, say, Camp Tools or Lancaster's Sakai environment. As long as they've got basic LTI enabled and you know what the secret and the key is, then in that, when you set up the portal, you can say, right, we're going to be connecting to, you know, some Sakai instance anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So localhost is just this machine, but obviously for our Sakai it's alliance.edu.au.
Thanks.
In your video that you just demonstrated for, you mentioned, you emphasized a point about having the same identity
Yeah.
for the portal and the Sakai. So the identity you actually grab is from Sakai for the uPortal, isn't it?
So what happens is you log in to uPortal, let's say with just the Steve username, that'll fire off a web service request to Sakai to get the internal ID that you have in Sakai, and then it uses that to make the request. We could actually cut that step out, but when I was reading the spec, it did say that the parameter you send across shouldn't be like easily identifiable as a person. So that's why we obfuscate that a bit to the user ID, which no one would know.
Your trust relationship is global from uPortal to the entire Sakai site. The user doesn't have to approve it on a per user.
No, so it's using as long as it's coming from wherever the portal is set up with that like the key. So in this case it was my.anu.
So all your ANU users will automatically have that trust relationship.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
No more questions? Well, thanks, Steve. I think that was very useful, and I'm sure you'll all be running off onto the uPortal and implementing that. It was a good practical application. So now I think we're on the home stretch. So our final and exciting keynote speech will be in Studio One, so you can grab some sun on the way. And if you want to ask any further questions of Steve, you'll be around.
I'll be around, yep.
Yeah, for a little bit. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.